Thanks everyone for coming. These are meant to be quick, so I'll get right into it. So this is about composable search with Edge Webhooks and GraphQL, everyone's favorite topics. About me, I'm Chris. I came here from Boston, which is a lot like Dublin, believe it or not, at least weather-wise anyway. I've been working with Sitecore for a long time. Saw a UFO once. If you want that story, buy me a pint later, I'll tell you. Okay. Let's start with why do we even need search, right? Why don't we just use GraphQL for everything? So there's, GraphQL is pretty useful, pretty powerful tool, but there's some reasons why we want a dedicated search provider. One of the big ones could be that GraphQL has limitations. There's a limit on how many queries you can execute. It's pretty generous. It's like 80 per minute or something, or 80 per second. I don't know. It's a pretty big number. But if you have a pretty busy site, you could easily hit that limit. And then, if you're using that to run your site search, that could quickly, disable it for a period of time. GraphQL is pretty good at doing field filter searches. So if you want to do a relationship search, you find some things that have this content on it or whatever, great, I can do that. But what can it not do? It can't do keyword searches, which is a pretty common use case in search. If your site didn't have keyword searches, I would think there's something wrong with it. You can't do faceted search, which is also pretty common, not as common as keyword, but a lot of sites will. If you don't know what faceted search is, that's those little check boxes with the refinements where you can narrow them down, like when you're shopping for stuff on Amazon. And it can't do arbitrary numbered pagination. And you're like, why do we care about that? And I don't know. Everybody wants to load more, but customers want us to implement page 1, 2, 3, 4, as if anyone ever goes past page 1 of search. So in Sitecore XP, we used to use Solr to handle these tasks. And we got that for free. It shipped with the product. And the indexing all pretty much just worked out of the box. But we don't get that anymore with XM Cloud. Solr's still there, but we can't access it in our head app. So let's talk about indexing and the strategy in general. And this is my awesome big bold print diagram for people with bad eyesight like me. So we've got our content in XM Cloud, right? And we've got our search index. And generally, there's two processes that we want to set up. We want to have a pull where our search index talks to XM Cloud, like, give me everything you got, because I need it. I need to index it. So we want to set up that process, and then we want to have a push process, where XM Cloud is like, here's some new stuff for you to index. So those are the two things that we want to recreate. That we used to get that for free with Solr and using the index update strategies. We don't get those anymore. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the pull process. And just a quick note about what I was saying, that sort of strategy can apply to really most any search provider you're using with XM Cloud. If you're using Sitecore Search, that's exactly what you're going to set up when you're implementing Sitecore Search. My particular customer, of course, came with their own search provider, and that is the power of composability. They have this thing called Yext, which I'm hopefully going to be able to show you if the demo doesn't blow up. And they're like, no, we don't want to buy Sitecore Search. We've already got Yext, so you need to implement search with that. And we're like, all right, I guess we'll figure it out. So let's talk about the pull process. The first step is the search index is the one responsible for initiating that. So the search index is going to be like, hey, either on a timer or a manual trigger or both. It's going to say, I need all the content, let me go get it. So the way that I've got this set up is that we make a request to a serverless function in Next.js. And really what that does is it wraps a query to GraphQL. And that is the query that is going to get our content out of Sitecore and send it in a nice JSON package over to the search index, where we're going to map it. And then GraphQL does have some next page cursor-based pagination. So the crawler can page through all the results, get you everything that's in your content database, and get that into the search index. So I've got code screenshots here, but I'm actually just going to tab over to my IDE and show you this. So the first thing we've got is our crawler, right? So hopefully everybody can read this. This is a pretty simple Next.js API. So the great thing about Next.js is you can make a folder called Pages and a folder in that called API and just throw some code in there, and it'll turn it into a serverless function, assuming that you have written, exporting a function that can process a request. So this one here, as you can see, We've put some basic security on it, right? So we want to make sure that only our crawler is going to be able to access this. So we check an API key that we configure an environment variable. We pull some stuff out of the parameters, which would be the root item of our tree. We're going to pass that as a GUID. And the cursor for pagination. And really, what we're doing is we're making this query in GraphQL, and it looks like this. So I'm going to quickly walk you through this query. We're essentially getting everything under the root item that has layout, right? So that has layout thing is key because that is telling me that this page has presentation, or this item has presentation, which means it's probably a web page that we want to crawl, right? And down here, I'm just basically grabbing some structural data, and then I'm just saying, give me all the fields, right? When you're implementing this yourself, maybe you want to be a little more strategic. You want to target it a little more. For my purposes, I'm just like, give me every field, give me the rendered value, and then I'll handle pulling out what I need in the actual search index. Too many tabs. Okay. So, so now we're going to look at how we map this data in Yext. So I'm going to tab over to that. And we have here, this is where we're configuring our pull API. So this is actually a pretty nice tool. You can see here, this pull API, it's going to make a request to, let me zoom in here a little bit for you all so you can see it. It's going to make a request to that GraphQL endpoint that I set up on my Next.js, or sorry, the Next.js serverless function that wraps the GraphQL query. I'm passing in my API key. Don't look at that. And then underneath here, I'm telling it I've got token-based pagination cursor. It's using a cursor. When you do a query with GraphQL, one of the things you can configure it to do is to give you back a cursor. And I'm using, this is like the JMES. It's like some JSON path query syntax here. And I'm telling it, in my result structure, it's the search.pageinfo.endCursor. That's where the cursor information is going to be. And I'm telling this to do no more than 10 requests per second, which is another great thing I could configure in this tool, Yext, because again, I don't want to throttle my Experience Edge endpoint and degrade any sort of experience for the users. So if we have 80 requests per second. At most, I'm going to take 10 of them when we're crawling. So the next thing we have to do is map the fields. So like I said, we're passing all of the field data for each item, and we're going to do some selectors on those. So if I go back in here, right, see, now it's mad that I don't have the API key. So we'll move on anyway. Oh, come on. Ignore that. Okay. So this is what's coming back when I make my GraphQL request. So you can see here, it just did it, right? And I'm getting back everything in this results block, and you can see here all my fields are coming back. So I can go into the tool, and I can say, these are the things we're extracting. We're extracting the name of the item, we're extracting the path, the URL, the title, and I'm even going in and I'm pulling out some taxonomy data. So like I've tagged my content with some topics, as you can doing a paranormal blog here. So I'm able to pull that out of the field data, and this is, again, a little small, so I'll zoom in there. I'm able to pull that out of the field data using this, this query. And this is all the data you're getting out of GraphQL, right? So you're moving through, you can do some transforms, right? And I can format my rich text, and so on and so on. So the tool is pretty great at that. And when this runs, it will build up my whole content database here. And you can see I've got about 14 pages in my index. That's right here in the corner. If I flip over to XM Cloud, it's sort of representing all of this. Of course, it's going to make me authorize again. Thank you, Sitecore. It's so secure. It's grabbing essentially all of my pages that have presentation on them, right? And I've got this data folder, which this is just a folder for data source, component data source items, and I'm not crawling that, and that's by virtue of telling GraphQL, I only want items that have layout data. Oops. So now let's talk about the push process. So we've got everything in the index. It's running on a schedule of, like, say, once an hour or once every 6 hours. But now my content authors, they publish out a page and they made a change. They need to see that in their search results immediately, right? So let's take a look. This is a little more complicated. So when we publish to Experience Edge, we have the ability to set up a webhook. And there's several of them, but the ones we're interested in are create, update, and delete. I'm only going to talk about update on this one, but you would need to set up create and delete as well using a similar sort of process. So Experience Edge, it invokes the webhook, which our webhook is pointing to another Next.js serverless function that is once again going to perform some logic. That's going to extract the GUID of the item we're updating, query GraphQL for that field data exactly like we were before, just give me all the fields. It's going to roll that up into one big JSON structure and push that into the search index using the push API. So we can take a look here. Hopefully you can read this. This is an example of what a payload would look like from a content updated webhook in Experience Edge. So you can see here, this is the JSON that you would use to essentially create that webhook. And I don't have time to get into that in this talk, but I did write a blog post about it. There are other blog posts about it out there if you Google for it on how to set up these webhooks. So if we're looking at the result data here, we can see I've got this stuff labeled layout data. And again, that's what I'm interested in because that's telling me that a page got updated. In this particular publish, I've got some related items. Maybe I had a media item, maybe I had some data source items that went out. But really what I want is the layout data, right? So I'm going to iterate over those, over this structure, grab anything that says entity definition is layout data, and then I'm going to pull the GUID for that item and make my GraphQL query. So I can show you what that code looks like. And don't worry about, I have a link to the code at the end of this if you want to pull down the repo and look at this yourself. But essentially, yeah, here's, again, we've got a serverless function Next.js, which is doing sort of exactly what I just said. We're iterating over the updates. We're looking for layout data, pulling the GUID out of that, and then we're making our GraphQL request, and we're doing a little bit of error handling. So the advantage, again, of if you can go straight to GraphQL, there's still benefit in wrapping this in a serverless function because you can add things like validation, security, error handling, things like that, and logging, which is super nice. We want to be able to log this stuff. So our query, once again, pretty straightforward. I'm only getting one item at a time with this query, but again, I'm just saying, give me all the fields, all the JSON values of those fields, and I will go ahead and map them in my search provider. So if I flip back over to Yext, which is my search provider here, we've got, oh, that's an example of a webhook there. So we've got our push API, right? And once again, we've got the same selectors. We're mapping the data pretty much the same way, right? So at the end of my serverless function here, I am actually pushing all of this up to Yext. And that is being done right here. So we're pushing all that up to the Yext endpoint. And that's, again, that's another API endpoint that the tool would provide. So if we go back in here, and how much time do I got? 2 minutes? Let's see if I can make this happen in 2 minutes. They said they were going to try to speed up publishing. I'm going to make a change, and I'm going to publish it to Edge, and we're going to see if the webhook fires and it updates my entity. So I'm going to change just the title of this page. I'm going to save it. Yep. I'm going to publish it. Yep. The item is being published. So if I go over to Vercel right now, and we just sort of wait for this, I put some logging in here so we can see when these requests get fired. We can see if the webhook hit my serverless function, and it hasn't hit yet. While we're waiting for this, though, does anyone have any questions? No? Okay. So it's taking its time. So like I said, this is a very high level of the process you would need to do to basically get some MVP level, like minimum viable product of a search provider. So if you're using Sitecore Search, which maybe many of you are, at a conceptual level, it's going to be very similar. The fine details are going to be different depending on the tool you're using as your search provider. So I have not yet implemented the push model with Sitecore Search. I have been able to set up, I have been able to set up the pull where Sitecore Search makes the request. But yeah, conceptually and in theory, this should all work. So try one more time, see if it came through. No, it didn't. It's not publishing, but I swear it was working before this. So you just have to take my word for it. They said they were going to make the publishing go faster. So yeah, I showed you all this. So once again, thank you. There's the QR code if you want to pull down the repo with the serverless function so you can take a look at it yourself. It is set up to use Yext, which you can create a sandbox in Yext and a developer sandbox and play around with this yourself. And maybe you'll decide that that is a tool that will suit the needs for your project. So, thank you.